This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Business, history, and culture with a nautical twist. Today, I'm going to discuss the interesting relationship of a Philadelphia railroad engineer and the Czar of Russia, a relationship that took place during the mid-19th century. During this time, the United States and the United Kingdom were at the forefront of steam railroad development while other countries looked on. And one country that did sit up and take notice was the largest empire on the face of the earth, the Russian Empire. Its ruler, Tsar Nicholas I, was an autocrat. He was a reactionary, but he did know good technology when he saw it, and he saw the value of steam trains being able to connect his vast empire. So during this time, he hired a Philadelphia railroad engineer by the name of Joseph Harrison to come to Russia, to come to St. Petersburg, to design the first rail link between Moscow, the old imperial capital, and St. Petersburg, the current imperial capital, the two biggest cities in Russia. The historian Daniel Jurgen has labeled the era between the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 and the start of the First World War in 1914 as the first age of globalization. And this relationship between, here you have a representative of a new republic, Joseph Harrison, a man from a city dominated culturally by Quakers, a sect that did not believe in monarchy and titles and rank, working closely with the Czar of all the Russias, an autocrat who did not believe in human rights, who did not believe in any form of constitution whatsoever, only in the God-given right of the Czar, Europe's last absolute monarch. It's an interesting relationship which I will discuss and shed some light on this first age of globalization. I'd like to call this story The Autocrat and the Engineer. In the view of the interest and importance at the present time of everything which relates to the development of railroading, it is well to remember what has been done in America to lay the foundations of the locomotive industry, and therefore we feel that it is desirable to recall the extent to which the design of the modern locomotives is indebted to the work of Joseph Harrison Jr., although it is more than 30 years since he has passed away. Cassier's Magazine, November, April 1910. The son of a Philadelphia grocer, Joseph Harrison Jr., 1810 to 1874, received his early training the old-fashioned way, learning by doing. After cutting his teeth as an apprentice machinist, at age 25, Harrison got a job with the locomotive builder Andrew McCalla Eastwick. While in Eastwick's employ, Harrison came up with a solution to a problem that had long befuddled early locomotive designers. The first locomotive, such as George Stephen's Rocket of 1829, was propelled by only a single pair of driving wheels. If engineers could add additional pairs of wheels, the locomotive's pulling capacity, especially on steep grades, would be greatly increased. But no one seemed to be able to come up with a way to evenly distribute the energy from the steam pistons to more than two driving wheels. In 1838, Harrison patented his so-called equalizing lever, which, according to Cassier's Magazine, ensured the equal division of the load upon the two axles. This invention made Harrison and his now partner Andrew McCalla Eastwick very much in demand as locomotive designers. Thanks to Harrison's equalizing lever, locomotives could now have 4 leading wheels and 4 driving wheels, 440, a configuration known as the American type. By the end of the 19th century, locomotives with as many as 10 driving wheels, known as decapods, would be pulling heavily loaded freight and passenger cars over the Allegheny Mountains and into the burgeoning interior of the United States. A large percentage of the freight carried by the Pennsylvania and Reading railroads was coal, which powered the factories and heated the homes of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and other eastern cities. In 1843, the 33-year-old Joseph Harrison received a summons from the richest and most powerful man on earth, Tsar Nicholas I of Russia, who reigned from 1825 to 1855. The Tsar's mission for Harrison: design locomotives suited to carry freight and passengers between St. Petersburg and Moscow, a distance of 400 miles. Tsar Nicholas could not have had a more different upbringing than Harrison's hardscrabble one. He had been raised in the splendor of the Winter Palace, surrounded by tutors and servants. Nicholas had been taught from a very young age that the Romanov family's divine right to rule came directly from God. Because he was the third son of the erratic Tsar Paul I, few thought that Nicholas had a chance of becoming the ruler of the largest kingdom on earth, 8.6 million square miles to be exact. As a result, he was trained as a military engineer and an army officer. Yet when his eldest brother Alexander I died childless in 1825, and another brother, Constantine, refused the throne shortly after that, Nicholas had no choice but to accept the crown. After his mother Catherine the Great's death in 1796, Tsar Paul I forbade women from inheriting the throne. Many in Russia, especially reform-minded members of the gentry, feared Nicholas as a reactionary autocrat who sought to undo the liberal reforms of his predecessors. Almost immediately after Nicholas became emperor and autocrat of all the Russias, a cadre of military officers refused to swear allegiance to the new monarch. On December 26, 1825, about 3,000 of them assembled in the Senate Square, St. Petersburg. Their plea to the Czar: the creation of a constitutional monarchy along the lines of Great Britain's, complete with an elected representative body that curbed the absolute power of the Tsar. Nicholas I was incensed by this challenge to his authority. He ordered his loyal soldiers to open fire on the demonstrators. The leaders of the so-called Decembrists were captured and executed. Others were exiled to Siberia. During the next 30 years, Nicholas attempted to squash all liberal thought from his realm by promulgating a new educational curriculum based on the trinity of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality. According to his educational minister, Sergei Uvarov, it is our common obligation to ensure that the education of the people be conducted according to the supreme intention of our august monarch. In the joint spirit of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, I am convinced that every professor and teacher, being permeated by one and the same feeling of devotion to the throne and fatherland, will use all of his resources to become a worthy tool for the government and to earn its complete confidence. In addition to stepping up censorship and the powers of the secret police, the Tsar embarked on a series of military adventures that alienated Russia's allies, most notably Great Britain. He also had the 1,500-room Winter Palace rebuilt following its total destruction by fire in 1837. The Tsar demanded his official residence be restored to its former grandeur within a year. One observer of the project noted, "During the Great Frost, 6,000 workmen were continually employed. Of these, a considerable number died daily, but the victims were instantly replaced by other champions brought forward to perish." Prospects for Russia's millions of serfs, laboring peasants who were bought, sold, and mortgaged by wealthy landowners, were bleak as well. Over in Philadelphia, Harrison may have heard about Tsar Nicholas's repressive governing tactics, but when presented with such a lucrative business opportunity as the Moscow to St. Petersburg Railroad, he could not say no. In 1843, Harrison and his young family set sail for Russia. Shortly before doing so, he and Andrew Eastwick sold their firm's equalizing lever patent to Matthias Baldwin, founder of Philadelphia's Baldwin Locomotive Company, for a tremendous sum of money. In Russia, Harrison not only showed the Tsar how to run a railroad, but also would dream up his own palace back in Philadelphia, one that would have fit right alongside the shimmering pastel confections lining the canals of St. Petersburg. As the capital of Imperial Russia, St. Petersburg was a city of many palaces. Some belonged to the Romanov families, such as Peterhof, the Winter Palace, Pavlovsk Palace, the Anichkov Palace, and Tsarskoe Selo. Others belonged to wealthy Russian nobles, such as the Yusupov, Veselovsky, and Stroganov clans. Many had been constructed in the 18th century as part of Tsar Nicholas I's ancestor Peter the Great's initiative to westernize Russia and have its upper classes adopt the manners of the French and Italian aristocracies. By the mid-19th century, these pastel pink and green confections were filled with malachite tables, gilded candelabras, and old master paintings. During big parties, their windows glowed with candlelight, magnified manyfold by crystal chandeliers and mirrors. The font of their owners' wealth were vast tracts of farmland and unpaid labor of thousands of serfs. Writer Ivan Goncharov satirized what he saw as a self-indulgent and indolent aristocracy in his 1859 novel Oblomov, in which the title character barely has the energy to rise from his bed. Why should he have motivation when money passively streamed in from his country estate? When you don't know what you're living for, you don't care how you live from one day to the next, Ilya Ilyich Oblomov says in the novel. You're happy the day has passed and the night has come, and in your sleep you bury the tedious question of what you've lived for that day and what you're going to live for tomorrow. Oblomov ultimately dies of his own laziness. To Philadelphian Joseph Harrison, the cosmopolitan opulence of St. Petersburg was a stunning contrast to the sober propriety of his native Philadelphia. Yet he remained immune to the malady of Oblomovitis. He worked hard and no doubt played hard during his many years in Russia. He successfully designed a series of new locomotives for the St. Petersburg to Moscow Railroad, as well as new freight and passenger cars. He also constructed a locomotive repair facility on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. His crowning achievement was the replacement of an old pontoon rail bridge over the Neva River with the cast-iron Bridge of the Annunciation. According to Harrison's biography in Cassier's magazine, Tsar Nicholas I was amazed at the Philadelphians' creativity and self-discipline, and as a result, the monarch bestowed numerous other tokens of friendship and esteem on the American engineer, the most prominent of which was the Order of St. Anne, awarded to those who performed exceptional feats of civil and military service. Its motto was, "To those who love justice, piety, and fidelity." Thanks to Tsar Nicholas I's patronage, Joseph Harrison came back to Philadelphia a very rich man. In 1855, during one of his periodic visits home, Harrison commissioned architect Samuel Sloan to build a new city house for his family on a 75-foot by 198-foot lot fronting the then mostly undeveloped Rittenhouse Square. Sloan had made a name for himself as a designer of picturesque suburban villas and urban townhouses in the Italianate style. Harrison instructed his architect to build an adaptation of the Pavlovsk Palace in St. Petersburg, an 18th century Tsarist residence he and his wife Sarah had admired during their time abroad. Built by Catherine the Great for her son Grand Duke Paul, Nicholas I's father, Pavlovsk was a jewel of neoclassical design. Samuel Sloan set to work at his drafting table. His Harrison mansion was a symmetrical structure composed of a 3-bay wide center block, flanked by a pair of 2-story wings. It had not one but 2 arched front doorways, no doubt influenced by the sight of all the old master paintings cluttering the walls of the Winter Palace. Harrison filled his own home's cavernous rooms with fashionable art, most notably 20 works from Charles Willson Peale's famous museum. His most notable acquisition was Benjamin West's Christ Rejected. The rear windows of the house looked out on a large enclosed garden. There was no pretense of Quaker austerity. This edifice was meant to dazzle and impress, inside and out. When Joseph and Sarah Harrison took up residence in their home at 227 South 18th Street in 1857, they were the proud owners of one of the largest and most flamboyant homes in the city of Philadelphia. Other members of Philadelphia's ultra-wealthy, most notably members of the Drexel family, built similarly large houses around the square in the years to come. Flush with cash from his Russian adventures and locomotive patents, Harrison took up intellectual, civic, and cultural pursuits with gusto. He served on the boards of the Fairmount Park Conservancy and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, making a substantial donation towards PAFA's new Frank Furness-designed home on North Broad Street. He died in 1874. The giant house stood until the 1920s, when it was demolished to make way for the Pennsylvania Athletic Club. Tsar Nicholas I ruled into his death in 1855. His son Alexander II took a much more liberal course than his reactionary father, freeing Russia's serfs in 1862, 1 year before President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in the United States. The Romanov dynasty came to a violent end in 1918, when Bolshevik revolutionaries gunned down Tsar Nicholas I's great-grandson Nicholas II and his entire family in Siberia. The old Romanov trinity of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality had been replaced by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin's communist rallying cry of peace, land, and bread. This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Thank you for listening. You can expect new episodes every week. To subscribe to the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast, visit steveujifusa.substack.com.